according to that, I am live. Good to have you here. My name is Iko Simon. This is Tokyo Tonight. It's 10:30 p.m. JST. It's actually 10:35. Some minor technical issues lately. Whenever I start this up, I have to recalibrate the screens, but that's all good. It's good to see you all. Thanks for joining. I know it was short notice again. I have been underwater lately. And I know I haven't been that active on Twitter. I've been kind of still reading news and tagging it, but not talking so much. So you probably would have noticed that. That said, there is a lot going on relatively news-wise, as Thomas H says. So actually, Thomas H, you heard it here first. I talked about the Abe problems last week, and it looks like they are becoming a thing. So I can talk some more about that. Aaron, good to see you. We've got Quentin Rankid, JMac217. I'll let some more people roll in, but it's been a big day, kind of exciting as a bit of as a space geek. Watching, I should get a JAXA shirt, shouldn't I? Given that JAXA has had the Hayabusa2 capsule land in Australia. Super interesting. We've got Clank Gun 72. Good to have you in. Yo, indeed. And it's interesting times. So in terms of what's been going on with me, like I say, I've just been really sort of underwater. I'm working from home, but just not able to turn very much to. So I basically today, I actually caught up. Where normally I watch the news every night on NHK, but today I actually watched 7 days of news, just the first sections of the news, just to make sure I was caught up and I could talk about things. So now I can do that. That's a good thing. Not a lot else going on. I mean, the general situation is here, as in most places in the northern hemisphere, it's getting kind of worse with the coronavirus stuff. I will talk a little bit about that. It's getting particularly bad in places like Osaka, but it's actually pretty bad in Tokyo and so on as well. Some interesting news stories and topics. I guess I might just dive straight into it. I realize it was short notice tonight, but I'm sure we'll get other people rock in. Lysander 45, good to see you. Indeed, the moon has always been the Chinese sovereign territory, and now they have the flag to prove it, I guess. Yes, I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I'm pretty sure they're going to start sending Coast Guard ships around it pretty soon and pretending it was theirs all along. But good on them, actually. I mean, look, in terms of landing a probe on the moon and sending back some photos, one thing I always thought was really interesting, listening to the accounts of the astronauts, the Apollo astronauts that went to the moon, they talk about how even where the the film that they took on the moon is in color, everything is very overexposed, and they talk about how everything looks very black and white. The moon looks gray, just the way it looks from Earth. The reason the moon looks so white, by the way, is that it's just purely reflecting sunlight. It's acting like a mirror. And this is what happens from a distance, that the spectrum, white light represents all the mixed colors of the spectrum. So the further you are from something and you can't distinguish the colors, it looks white. And also on the moon, everything was overexposed and it looks very bright and white. But the astronauts pointed out that the moon is not gray. The moon is actually brown. It's like dirt. They pointed out it was hard to point that out. If you have a look at their spacesuits, it's actually kind of, let's say, more like brown dirt than sort of gray like you'd imagine. And they pointed out it was hard, that didn't come across. But when they were there, it was like a fine sand, sort of the regolith on the surface of the moon. So what I actually liked about the Chinese mission and the photos that came from there was you could sort of see that. You could sort of see that sort of brown, very thin, powdery, actually quite dangerous and horrible substance that they have covering the surface of the moon. So that was pretty cool. Who else we got coming in here? We got Nyanko. Good to have you in here, Nyanko. The US has 1 million new cases in 5 days. Yeah, well, it's going up everywhere. Shubus, excellent to have you on time, especially, of course, being from Panama, where it is early in the morning. So great to have you here. We've got Sergeant Pilko, salutations. We've got everyone rocking in. It's been an interesting week, and let's just rock into it, shall we? Hope everyone's well and staying safe, of course. It is sexy voice evening. Nasally awkward voice evening, perhaps, but I'll take it. I think I've talked before. I mentioned last week actually that I've been watching this series. In fact, that reminds me, there is a new episode of this. This series, just by the way, on ancient Roman history, on French history. They do all kinds of history, not just to do with Japan, but this Extra Credits channel. And you can listen to it as a podcast, just as audio, and it's perfectly good. They have some nice animated sort of drawings and so on to illustrate things. But yeah, they're doing things on the samurai, the Civil War, when Japan opened up and ended the shogunate period right now, and it's a story I've heard lots of different variations on, but this channel just has a talent for telling the story in a really clear, interesting way that, to me, makes it kind of new again. Yeah, I'm really enjoying this channel and this series, and I highly recommend it. If you're watching anything else on YouTube, watch Extra Credit History, Extra Credits. And yeah, check out the end of the Samurai series that's on right now, and the other stuff. It's just really good. So that is a thing. Yeah. So this is going back to the start of the week. Of course, everything going so well, of course, with COVID-19 in Japan, that the government decided, they announced at the start of the week, is the medical system in Osaka was starting to collapse, and in Hokkaido and other places, and it's gotten worse through the week, as we'll talk about in a moment. The government said, yeah, let's keep the go-to encouraging people to travel and go out and eat and meet friends system going until next Golden Week, shall we, next May. Again, it's kind of counter to common sense. I get why they're doing it. I mean, it is tough for the economy, and they're trying to support businesses that really, in other countries, there's the huge spike in unemployment and, the difficulties with a lot of businesses going under. This is to give a lifeline to those by encouraging people to go out. But of course, it's tough. There are measures that go along with this to try to make sure that people can enjoy food in restaurants and go to shops and so on and travel, and minimize the risk of catching COVID-19. But clearly, the fact that the numbers are spreading so much sort of shows it's tricky, and it's obviously not a zero cases strategy. And that can lead to problems, which we're about to talk about. One thing at the start of the week, which was interesting, again, I was so busy, I didn't get to watch it until today. But I saw the noise being made about it. Nike did one of their ads that they do in many countries. That sort of there is a lot in the advertising industry of virtue signaling. Well, some would say virtue signaling. That's a bit of a cynical way of putting it, perhaps. But aligning themselves with worthy social causes. Generally, speaking up for underrepresented or sort of underdog type people, and it's something that perhaps the companies themselves advocate for. Perhaps it's something that the advertising companies sort of see an opportunity for. And look, I think it's good. It's good branding for a business like Nike or like sports businesses to be seen as supporting underdogs and supporting worthy people and causes associated with. It does slightly make up for the fact that companies like Nike, manufacture their shoes in a lot of third world countries with questionable business practices around that, and it kind of helps to reverse a little bit of that image, I suppose, as well. But they put an ad on which basically featured 3 soccer players from different sort of backgrounds in Japan, which can be subject to discrimination. Particularly, there was a Zainichi Korean, there was a mixed race, black Japanese, and come think of it, what was the other one? Just being bullied, I think. It was just straight up bullying. I might have that wrong. Like I said, I just watched it a wee while ago. The ones that really stood out, of course, were the Zainichi Korean, who had issues. For example, it showed in a visual way the idea that, for example, they have, often they adopt Japanese names. They're born multi-generations in Japan, but, they adopt Japanese names, but they have their Korean identities as well, but they feel pressure to hide that. So it shows someone sort of coming to terms with the idea of using their Korean name and feeling comfortable about that. Mixed race. So they talk about Zainichi, mixed race, and was there another one? I'm not sure that there is, but anyway, it goes through the sort of bullying and issues that they can go through. So that was interesting. And it was interesting. There was a lot of backlash. It does remind me, when you see something like this, how behind Japan is, at least in relation to confronting and talking about these kinds of issues in places like America and New Zealand, I think these sort of conversations about the idea of, for example, should sports be, should you mix sports and politics or sports and social issues? And this was controversial, back in the 1960s, for example, when you had the Black Power salutes at the Olympics, and even in the 1990s, was it, when you had Kathy Freeman, I remember, Aboriginal athlete who took an Aboriginal flag and paraded it and was sent home for it, for not flying for basically by a racist Australian team manager who didn't want Aboriginal identity flag being associated with the Australian flag. Pretty horrible stuff, but pretty recent history. But we've kind of, and it's funny, in New Zealand we had the problem that we played rugby against apartheid South Africa, in spite of everyone saying that basically seems to be endorsing apartheid. And it was always the same thing. There were these lines between some things are more important than sport, and some versus people who are like, stop trying to politicize what I like, and shut up, and stop trying to make us look bad, or stop trying to taint the country by highlighting controversial issues or things that make it look bad. Racism in America, Indigenous people in Australia, New Zealand's relationship with South Africa. And yeah, true. And I guess it's easy to think now that these are no-brainers, but these are things that we've had to go through pretty hard. These were not smooth transitions into being more open-minded about these sorts of things. Now, Japan, as people love to tell you in their school-taught self-introductions, is a very homogenous country. I mean, it's true. It's not entirely homogenous. It's not as homogenous as a lot of people here seem to think it is, or a lot of people overseas seem to think it is, but it is pretty homogenous as countries go. And around that, the idea that, people naively sort of think that these sort of issues don't exist, mainly because they're just not exposed to them. And when Nike put up an ad showing 3 people, that suffer sort of discrimination, there was a lot of reaction that I was seeing on Twitter from various Japanese sort of news feeds and whatnot, of people saying that this is just Nike trying to make Japan look racist. It's trying to racialize Japan the same way that America is, and trying to bring their problems over here. And other people saying that this is an ad where all the regular Japanese people look like bad people, bullying a few, sort of minorities, when this sort of thing, doesn't really happen so much. And so much so, some people were saying this is just Nike trying to demonize Japan, and, we're boycotting. Of course, a lot of people spoke up to celebrate it, but a lot of people also said that they were, as happens when you do this sort of thing, it's kind of startling to me to see that the kind of reaction that, an ad showing, let's be considerate towards, minorities, could spark a lot of people openly saying, well, I'm not buying your stupid shoes anymore, outside of blatantly racist people. But there were a lot of people who probably don't consider themselves to be racist who reacted that way and thought, sport and social issues shouldn't mix, and they said all of that. And I guess in the end of the day, Nike, to their credit, I don't think they could have gotten on a pulpit and started preaching, no, you're all wrong and we're right and you need to think about this. But they could have backed off and cancelled the ad and said, we're sorry, we didn't mean to offend anybody. But they've actually stayed silent, and I think that that's better. As Naomi put it, the question was the question wasn't what they think, it was what people watching it think, and it was to start that discussion. And you could see, and there was actually among the many reposts on Hatina Bookmarks, the Japanese sort of bookmark collection site that I follow in my RSS feeds, somebody did a little mini blog in Japanese pointing out that the people who seem to react the most adversely against this are the people who identify with the bullies, who themselves feel persecuted. They're sensitive because they are racist. It's making all of these racist people feel uncomfortable. And yeah, so it's provoked a discussion, and I think that's probably the best possible outcome of the ad, and I'm glad that they've left it like that. And sure, this is maybe getting a little bit, some people might feel like it's getting a bit too much nowadays, but with everybody trying to outdo each other for being woke and whatnot. But this actually was a reminder that Japan is actually a long way back in the past on this. And these sorts of things more and more. I mean, again, in Shinjuku, when my son was born, he wasn't born in Shinjuku, but we registered. We were living there at the time. And this is, within one of the 23 wards of Tokyo, one of the more diverse ones. But I remember seeing some stats that something like more than 20% of the kids, new births in Shinjuku at the time that my son was registered there, were from international backgrounds. 1 in 5, which would do pretty well. I certainly, in a place like London or New York, you probably got like 50% or even more than that of being, from international backgrounds. But in Japan, that's pretty. It's a very, very, very small part of Japan, but it's pretty respectable diversity, and it's spreading. So, this is all growing pains, I suppose. To me, credit to Nike for starting the conversation. And look, the ad, I don't think the old image, I've always been worried, of course, having a multiracial son that might, that he was going to eventually get singled out as being different. But his class, where he is, he's got the 40 kids in his class, and there are from international backgrounds in his class, I would say about 6 or 7 in the class. There are a couple of Chinese and Koreans, which don't really stand out so much, and a couple of visibly sort of half kids, but I've been waiting for it, and granted, he's in a nice, we're in a nice suburb. It's a regular school, but it's a nice area. When I used to coach the rugby team from this area, I used to talk about how you go to some other there are different areas, better off areas and less well off parts of Tokyo. And I remember once we went to a rugby tournament with kids from other parts of Tokyo that weren't so well off, and these kids, they were suntanned, and they were doing like press ups, and these were like 10-year-old kids who had like visible muscles and stuff like that. And I was kind of like, holy crap, it's like they've been starving these kids and making them do military training. And the team which I was coaching, they were pale and chubby, and they looked like they were an orchestra who got lost and showed up at a rugby match, and they played like it too. Bless their hearts. But it's interesting to see the place progress, even in the time that I've been here, and compared to the stories that I've heard. But Milchman, I would love. Well, no, I wouldn't want him to become a bully, but I would love to teach him kickboxing. But look, I was the pudgy orchestra kid. I didn't start playing rugby till I was like nearly 30, and I didn't start kickboxing till I was like around the same time. I didn't start properly sort of kickboxing till I was about like 35. So I guess I found my testosterone late in life. But yeah, it's good to see more people rocking in. Let's just check out who else is in the comments. In fact, I still got Nesta125. Good to see you, Nesta. Jay, just Jay. How do I think it is in Tokyo with the coronavirus cases? By the way, to anyone, as always, if you want to get my attention, make sure I don't miss your comment. Just do an @Mark Simon. I'll be able to see it. It'll flash orange up on the screen, and I'll be able to scroll back and make sure that I catch you. But Jay asked me a question. How do I think it is? It's the same as it's been since March. It's kind of freaky. I am still working almost entirely from home. The only time I'm leaving is to run. Now, it's getting pretty cold now, and I noticed, probably partly because it was cold. It's great when it's cold because you can run faster. You don't get all overheated and tired. But at the same time, your muscles stay stiff if you don't warm up properly, or you don't start slowly. And I was just going straight into sprints and not warming up properly, and I kind of got sore muscles and stuff like that for the first time since I started running properly. So yeah, so I've been doing that, but other than that, no, I've just been at home, and I would not feel comfortable going into, I guess I would feel more comfortable now than in the beginning if I had to go into the office or something like that, but I would really stay away from crowds. I don't think it's bad. It certainly isn't in a crisis. We've got roughly 500 cases per day right now, so I remember when we were panicking back when it was 100 cases per day, but it still is, compared to what we're hearing about in America and in Europe, it's not so bad, but, obviously everybody's staying home and being careful. Milchman, by the way, good to see you. We've got Mr. Cordy Chair, but you're late. No worries. Good to have you in here. We've got, and that is it. Are we still doing introductions, Mr. Cordy Chair? No, I've just gone through the first story, the Nike ad, and doing some more introductions for people like yourself that showed up afterwards. But all good in the hood. Next one, some more progress where the government is spending a lot at the moment on economic stimuluses for next year. Stimuli, I suppose you would say. And a lot going on at the moment with plans to subsidize renewable energy as well as carbon sequestration, which is where you put filters on top of smokestacks to capture all the carbon and all the greenhouse gases and so on, and solidify it and make it so that you can bury it in the ground, basically turn it into like artificial coal rather than have it go into the atmosphere. It is funny, I mean, I suppose again, this is someone who used to work in renewable energy consulting or policy consulting for the government. It's of course ideal and nice if you can have like windmills and wave generators generating hydrogen from the ocean or whatever, and having like entirely renewable and entirely clean forms of generation. But at the end of the day, if you take climate change seriously as a crisis, you have to sort of use all tools available and treat it like an emergency to reduce and stop emissions. And you can't go cold turkey. I mean, you can ask, and we are doing a lot of things to move in that direction quickly. But there is a progression to that, and there are things that we can do now rather than simply banning chimneys. You can do things to actually allow a transition period where in the meantime you can have those chimneys still emitting less, and you can do things with the cars. It actually reminds me, there's a lot of stories going on. I've been mentioning Japan has always been more invested in the idea of hydrogens and fuel cell cars rather than battery electric cars. And there's merits to fuel cell cars that I've talked about before, that you could theoretically swap gasoline infrastructure for hydrogen infrastructure. And in fact, a lot of petroleum companies also find, remember, Japanese government has invested in a lot of petroleum companies and so on as well. You can transport it, and it's easy for petroleum companies to probably switch, much easier to switch into hydrogen, which is also storable and transportable than grid-based electricity, which in Japan is a complete disaster for reasons that I've talked about before. It actually reminded me the other day, seeing this, that there are going to be much more incentives. They're going to double the electric car subsidies, which means that if you're going to buy a Tesla or whatever, it's going to get even cheaper. So that's good news. But it also reminded me, actually, a few years ago, I was talking to people who work at companies like Toyota and so on through family connections. And the Japanese government has been thinking about this for a long time, and they've been thinking like deeper about this than you might realize as well. I think it's super cool what Tesla's doing, and all these other electric cars that are coming up in the US. But at the same time, Japan has been going in a different direction, and I think it's good to have lots of different options and choices around this. And one thing that's been talking about is not just electrifying the cars, not just making them electric or having electric motors, but also the idea of putting basically electric wires under highways and main roads, so that cars can have batteries in the cars which can charge from the roads. So basically, like trams, basically, that they could run and they could actually be adding power and charging while they're running, taking power. Again, how you do that in terms of, okay, that's going to be a lot of electricity being, that I suppose, does that get paid for by taxes? How does that get paid for? I suppose you can monitor and track it on cars or whatever. But again, the idea of what that would do for things like trucking and logistics, would be super cool. It would just open up a lot of possibilities. And there's just a lot of really, really exciting stuff happening at the moment. And it's great to see governments. I was mystified by the backtracks from Australia and America to protect and try to, once again, boost industries like coal. They have their purposes, and again, you don't have to wipe them out immediately, but the idea that that's where the government would actually spend extra money, and that they would actually be blocking programs to move towards these things, which are not only better just for the climate crisis, but they're also just better, for they generate new jobs, and for long-term infrastructure as well. They're better and more reliable and sustainable. Why they're not investing in them, well, they haven't until now, has kind of mystified me, but it's good to see that people have probably started to recognize the degree of the crisis, and they're taking it seriously. So yeah, Lysander 45. Subaru the car, good to see you. No worries, good to have you, and you can watch the rest of the video. It'll stay up recorded, so no worries about that. Good first story, by the way, so it is worth going back and watching. Lysander 45. Buy compression sleeves if you're going to winter run. Need a sleeve for your left knee and only walk. Yeah, it's probably a pretty good idea. I've just decided I'm actually my Achilles. I snapped my Achilles. Don't forget, the first time I started running back in March, and I was out for like 3 months from that. So I don't want to do that again. And my Achilles my other leg has been getting sore. So I've just been thinking I'm just going to challenge myself to run slowly and not run fast, and maybe wear some warmer clothes. But it's not a bad idea, actually. Wearing that while running, I'll have to think about that. Thank you for the suggestion, Lysander. JZam, good to see you. A lot of coal-powered cars. Well, there are some people who do that sort of thing. Tawaiwai, excellent to see you. 3 a.m. in the morning, Samui. Yeah, thanks for joining from New Zealand. I know it's super late at the moment. Savas musician, Trump calls it clean coal. And look, there can be clean coal. You can extract hydrogen, for example, from coal. It's actually possible to do. It's something that Australia is proposing. It's not considered very clean, but you can do it. And there are degrees of badness in coal, but the idea that, we can just give up on renewable power because we have washed and scrubbed coal, not quite. And I grew up in a house where we burned coal in the house on a fireplace and had to chop wood. So yeah, I'm not totally against coal, but yeah, that's some pretty silly stuff, isn't it, Savas? Snapped ACL skateboarding, says Nesta. That sucks. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you're able to recover some from that. I mean, that's something that doesn't really ever get better, or it stays pretty bad. So yeah, I was always I happily disclose that I was always too gutless and uncoordinated to ever get good at skateboarding. I did gradually move from bodyboarding to surfing. And when I was surfing, but all my surfing friends they were skateboarders and they were also really good at it. But yeah, I'm just very happy if I can stand up, and it would definitely be the same. So respect for skateboarders, but dude, Mr. Quaddy Champ, I lived in the mountains in an army camp in the central plateau of the North Island where we had coal and a wood fire, and believe me, it got cold enough that you were grateful for all the coal, and it burns great. But yeah, definitely not good for the environment. JMac217, yeah. Again, this was part of my old job as well, that you can definitely buy dirty, unwashed like coal, which burns worse, and you can buy cleaner coal, but the idea of clean coal is a little bit too far. If you're into fonts, Collis.com, whenever they come out with a new list, I always show it. They've got basically a list of hundreds and hundreds of the latest, newest, coolest Japanese fonts. I found that I saw on my feeds that this got announced again, so I bookmarked it. I haven't actually looked at them yet, but let's do a quick scan. I mean, there are probably too many to actually look at here, but these are all Japanese. Some of them have kanji, some of them just have kana, but if you just want to go and download some free awesome fonts to add to your Mac or your PC or whatever, this is the place to get them, Collis.com, and they've got a whole bunch of new free ones that I've got a bookmark in the magazine as well as on my Twitter. That looks like a pretty regular sort of font for TV. That is interesting, but I don't think I'd ever use it. These are wingdings. That's kind of looks like someone wrote a letter. It's kind of cute, but I wouldn't use it. That's a bit retro, but that is all just a regular alphabet font. What else have we got in here? Font that looks like writing. That's kind of stylish. That's kind of cool. It's all kana, or is it? Yeah, it's kana, but it's pretty hard to read, but it looks kind of cool. The kanji around it does not look very attractive. Swiss cheese font, that's pretty cool. This is long and it goes on forever. That looks like pankiji. They call that one do, which is one thing it looks like. But yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, I guess probably the graphics kind of cool as well, but that looks genuinely handwritten and pretty cool. I kind of like these kind of weird fonts. So that looks cool. Moji. But it's super hard to read. Anyway, free fonts, Collis.com. Don't forget to check it out. These updates are really, really good. We've got new commenter here. In fact, a few new commenters. Good to see Claude Speed 30 had to chop wood and burn coal uphills both ways. We have Simon Chilkowski. I hope I said that right. Good to have you here and just joined, but I don't think that 15 years, give or take. But don't you think that 15 years, give or take, that Japan plans to phase out is a bit of a short time and wishful thinking? Well, it could be. I think it's good to set a goal that pushes. And I think in terms of government policy, I mean, in terms of electrification of cars, I think that could happen. It is funny when you hear about how long it took longer in Europe than it did in America, but when you hear about how long it took for cars to take over the roads from horses in America, it happened in about that time frame. So yeah, I mean, it's a big thing. I think one reason that it's possible and achievable with cars in Japan, that's a good question. Japan has a tax system that if you own a car, when a car reaches about the 7-year threshold, I think it is, the cost of registration of the car goes up like so much, and the resale value of the car goes down so much. It's why Japanese imports all get exported overseas, and they're all 7 or 8 years old when they get sent overseas, and they're always in good shape. They're not sold because they've turned into crap cars. They're sold because the registration fees go up, and the reason for this is that the Japanese government sets up the registration system to encourage people to keep buying new cars, because for a long time cars were such a big part of the economy here. So basically, most Japanese car ownership people have a 7-year cycle. So if you set a 15-year target to make sure all the cars on the road are electric, yeah, that's like 2 car purchases away. And given that most of the car companies now are sort of rapidly trying to retool, even allowing for a single car, product cycle, allowing for a whole 7-year product cycle, the idea that most car makers could be pretty much compliant with the requirement to be all electric, yeah, that's pretty achievable, actually. I think other problems like actually changing the power grid and stuff like that is harder, but I could see how that target could be done. So yeah, we've got Chelm9, another name I don't recognize. Good to have all these new viewers in. Good to have you along, and thank you for app marking. So I see the comment, do I foresee as much of a shift towards autonomous vehicles as to electric cars in Japan by 2030? This is totally just out of my ass. I am not an expert on this, but what I expect or what I predict is that probably electrification and self-driving will come out together. I think what I understand is it is possible with Japan with the hybrid cars that I understand that you can put self-driving car systems into hybrids, and that's sort of happening. But the fundamental architecture of electric cars, that you can put the batteries and the components all over the car, and of course the car has more room for electrics. They're not just running off a single small battery like a gasoline car. What I understand is that most of, in America, the Teslas and the Rivians and the cars which are being electrified now are being, even if they are not being launched with autonomous driving capability, they're being launched with all cameras all around the cars and the capability to be self-driving in terms of motorized steering column and radar and so on, so that when the technology gets good enough, you'd be able to just do it as a firmware upgrade for the car to be able to enable it. That's how they're building the electric cars from scratch. Integrating all of those cameras and that drivetrain technology and the motors and everything to be able to convert a gasoline car to do that would be a lot of hard work, and there isn't, these cars are built without the expectation of having, those built in. So because the electric cars are starting from scratch, and because the fact that you've got a lot more room to put in those sort of components, and there's a lot more electricity for it, it makes sense that they'd be doing it from the get-go with electric cars. So yeah, I don't know how long it's going to take till we'll get to the stage that where you won't even need to pay attention to the road. I hope that comes soon. But the fact that the cars that are being launched now have this to a degree, I think it's going to come out at the same time. But of course, that's just me talking. But that's what I would love to see that in Japan. And one thing, I think I've talked about Project X, a Japanese NHK documentary show about people who invented things like the Walkman, things like the Japanese car GPS, things like the iMode, internet telephones, the things that came out, technology that came out in Japan, and the stories of the engineers that invented these, like the Casio digital camera, the people who made the first commercial digital camera. And yeah, the story about how the first car GPS and how they developed it. And these were basically just some engineers who, the test was going to Setagaya, just a neighborhood with horrible maze-like unnavigable narrow roads, and how easy it is to get lost if you don't know that area, and very hard because you need really accurate GPS to be able to actually have a meaningful car navigation system there. And that's where they test drove a working GPS system for the road. That was like a really demanding sort of a spot. And hearing that story and knowing that these people weren't doing anything flash, they had very few resources, they just figured out a really clever way to do it. And that's what I think Japanese engineers are good at. And I'm really looking forward to, I'm sure that they're going to have a system, they're going to develop a system here that's probably going to look very different to what's being developed in America. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I have faith. Travis Moore, good to see him. And Duppy King, another username I don't recognize, and excellent to have you in here again. Immediate infrastructure to electric cars is huge. Charging network, costs, hilly terrain. Yeah, well, plug-in hybrids, there's already the technology there, and you can plug it in at your home. In terms of the charging stations, that is harder because you have to build those from scratch, and this is one of the appeals of hydrogen, although again, there's only 7 charging stations, I think, in all of Japan, right? Or in Tokyo, there's like 25 in Japan. But the government likes it because they can convert petrol stations, and petroleum companies are sort of on board with that. Yeah, it's kind of a big deal. But again, I mean, and ripping up the roads and putting, induction cables under the roads and then having standards for the cars to charge off them, that's also a big deal. But these are the things that we need to do. And don't forget the existing power lines in most places like 50, 60 years old, and those are not designed to last forever anyway. They need to be replaced. And one problem in particularly developed countries around the world is people have been lazy with infrastructure. They haven't fixed bridges and roads and tunnels and power lines, and we're paying for it now. Now there are tunnels and bridges that are collapsing. There's a big case in Italy like a year ago, collapsing because these things were just old. And 60 years ago it was normal for the government to spend 20% of its budget on building infrastructure. It was a good source of jobs and whatever. But once it was all done, they took all that budget away, and for 50, 60 years we've not spent the money on it where we should have been, and we should be. So yeah, we're gonna have to relearn that. We're learning that the hard way already. Anyway, I foreshadowed this last week, and I was right. You heard it here before it was big news. Abe's in trouble. And the thing about this is that Abe was in trouble when he was prime minister. People knew that he did this. He had a very dodgy sort of political supporters, very public party for his supporters, where it was pretty clear, one, that there were scamsters and gangsters and whatever showing up in the group photo for this, as well as the fact that it was, for a party that was funded for like 3,000 yen per person, and which Abe himself and his supporting groups were not supposed to be paying anything towards. It was a pretty big day, including an expensive dinner at an expensive restaurant, and there were no receipts or records from any of this. And it was just absolutely clear when he was prime minister that he had violated campaigning finance and the sort of electoral funding laws or political funding laws. And he sort of danced through it, and Suga, who was his spokesperson, who is now the prime minister, sort of shielded him, and he sort of danced his way through it. And he had a very politically friendly prosecutor at the time who was sort of shielding him from that. Interesting news in Korea that I'm not going to go into today of what happens when you don't have a friendly prosecutor. Spoiler alert, every ex-Korean president ends up in jail or dead by suicide. So in Japan, he just kind of, he was the Teflon Abe, the Teflon Sori. He just never got picked up on it, even though it was obvious. And there were nationwide lawyers groups who brought claims that this is clearly a breach of law, and clearly he should be being questioned about this criminally while he was prime minister more than a year ago. They filed claims in all the courts and all the district prosecutors around the country, and it's taken until now, like a few months after he's finished his prime minister stint, that yes, 2 days ago, the prosecutor's office said that they have called Prime Minister Abe in for questioning for what he knew about the misappropriation of funds and the disappearance of receipts and guest lists associated with his famous cherry blossom viewing party. And he said that, yes, he'll tell the truth and go and support them, and he's not going to say anything more about it. But it's pretty obvious. I mean, and the thing is it that serious? I mean, of the things that politicians can do, there are obviously much, much worse sort of scandals than paying for a party. But should have known better, and it was pretty obvious. And there's a serious question as to how he was able to get away with not even being questioned until now. So and it also calls into question his answers about the scandal, where he sort of dodged it more or less, but it means he was probably not truthful. And yes, indeed, Wingstar, who loves Abesori, sorry, Abesori, yes, indeed. So he got away with it. At least he didn't get charged, and the people around him didn't get charged while he was prime minister. That's how a lot of prime ministers end, is something like this. Normally some sort of scandal, which is normally attributed to one of their parliamentary secretaries who have to take the fall for them, and often end up in jail for this sort of thing. And Abe somehow got through it, probably by having by having political connections with the prosecutor's office, which in itself is also a problem. But it is catching up now, and although it is still just at the questioning stage, I don't see how he's going to be able to avoid. Probably the best case for him is that some of the people who worked for him and held the party and organized the party on his behalf are going to say that he didn't know anything, it was all me, and they're going to go to jail. At the worst case, it's pretty hard to imagine how Abe didn't know that they were hiding the receipts and that they were paying for everything, however, and he might get prosecuted himself. At this point, he's no longer prime minister. He's a backbench politician with a bail condition. But he is still pushing for constitutional revision pretty hard from there. So this might detract from that campaign. But for me, the biggest scandal is not so much that he clearly violated laws about money in politics, so much as he wasn't properly investigated when it was obvious, like a long time ago. And it seems like that must have been political interference with the prosecutor's office, which is that's the more interesting scandal from this. But it is now starting to happen after all of this time, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. Milchman 2, will Suga not just cover his ass now? Good question. Well, he's done it until now, but now that the prosecutors are moving and they are supposedly free from political interference, especially once they publicly start doing this, and they really couldn't avoid it any longer. I don't think Suga can really do anything. But we'll find out. It'll be interesting. But no question, this scandal, this and coronavirus, but even with coronavirus, Suga's kind of got a good head start. He had like a 76% approval rating. Well, that's already dropped to 50%, and it's clearly linked to this. But this was obvious, so yeah, it is interesting. Lysander 45, Jake Edelstein must be salivating at the prospect of writing another book on this scandal if he hasn't already. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I remember when it started, which was like a long time ago, and particularly there was one moment which I remembered when Suga was running interference for Abe, and they said, how can you justify, how can the Prime Minister be seen at a party where he appears to have invited, gangsters as guests? And Suga, the cabinet secretary at the time, said, well, who can really say what a gangster is? There is a legal definition in the law in Japan of what a gangster is. They are registered groups. They actually have lists of the people. It's actually, it couldn't be more clearly defined. So so yeah, and I remember at that time sort of thinking, yeah, well, this is one time where I do like to joke that particularly when Jake had his book out originally, and he was sort of on Twitter linking every news story to the Yakuza. It got a little, to me, he was starting to sound like the Aliens guy. Like, I'm not saying it was Yakuza, but it was Yakuza. He would sort of do that on everything. And I was actually getting to a point where I started to see in my head the alien guy from Discovery Channel every time he was talking about it. He has definitely gone off linking everything to Yakuza, but here we actually finally have an actual connection. So I say, go for a Jake Edelstein. He's surprisingly quiet, actually, in the circumstances. But yeah, why not? Kay and Koda. So many con men here in Japan that get away because it's embarrassing for people to come out and tell someone they get scammed because of their silliness. Well, it's true that there are a lot of, there is the whole anti-social forces industry in Japan, which is large and economically powerful. It relies upon that, and they do prey upon people. It is funny in the news, they actually now every day NHK in Tokyo, on the local news, the local news is 32 million people. It's the greater Tokyo area, so it's kind of a weird thing to have as local news, but they actually have a little corner saying these are the latest scams, and they actually explain how they work so that you don't get caught. But yeah, that's absolutely true, that there is a segment of society that is that basically doesn't feel constrained by normal sort of social rules, that when you're free of that, and that you can take advantage of people, there are people that do, and they make a lot of money from it. So anyway, that's the Abe thing that is happening. This is interesting. So Japan still thinks, and again, I feel the same about this as I felt when Japan announced that it was planning to become a tourism powerhouse back in the early 2000s. And I was like, well, I don't think the Japanese government has any idea what it's talking about, or this is absolute wishful thinking. You got to know to understand. They're dreaming if they think that they could do this. I thought about tourism, and they proved me wrong. Well, they've declared that they now want to do this for attracting financial talent. The investment bankers. By the way, I have serious reservations about wanting to attract all of the investment bankers from Hong Kong and Singapore to Japan for various just reasons of prejudice myself. I have friends who are in that industry, and some of them, some of them are great people. But I think it's an industry that breeds a type of culture that I just, so the City of London, Dubai has it, there are certain places that have it, and yes, they bring it. ton of wealth. They control a lot of money. And they're very well established in Hong Kong and Singapore, and particularly with people fleeing Hong Kong, the Japanese government wants to capitalize that to attract all of these global investment bankers and hedge fund managers to Tokyo and to Japan to run their funds and spend their money here. And they're talking about, in order to do that, they're actually proposing a bunch of measures to sort of make Japan more attractive. Of course, the first problem is that Japan is not attractive. It's got incredibly high income tax rate as well as capital gains tax rates. The reason investment bankers like to live in places like Singapore and Hong Kong is they pay in Singapore they pay zero capital gains. Any money that they make, profits or stock, they don't pay any tax on, and income tax they pay like 17% income tax. And they can live there pretty comfortably with a lot of rights, with easy access to permanent residency and without needing to become citizens. And they're basically set up as colonial-friendly places, Hong Kong and Singapore. Japan, on the other hand, has a base income tax rate for high-wage earners of like 47%, as well as huge capital gains tax, as well as the fact that if you live in Japan for more than 10 years and you die in Japan, you die here, 55% inheritance tax on all of your assets inside and outside of Japan. So, on top of the fact that they'll take nearly half of your income tax, and they'll have a huge capital gains tax, there'll also be this inheritance tax, which I face, I suppose, as a Japan resident. It makes me want to retire, make sure at least when I'm on my final leg that I probably wouldn't want to be in Japan if I want to make sure that my son can get an inheritance, because the taxes are just awful here. So the Ministry of Finance that wants to attract these people is negotiating with the Tax Ministry and Immigration to create to basically allow investment bankers that live in Japan to enjoy the same kind of tax rates that they would have in Singapore or Hong Kong. The Ministry of Finance says no way. So here it is. So basically, top tax rates in rival cities are lower than Japan's 45%. In Hong Kong has a maximum rate of 17%, while Singapore has up to 22% for people earning $1 million. So a good place to be, $1 million salary earner. And the inheritance tax of 55%, as well as Japan is tough, to achieve permanent residency, whereas if you, in places like Singapore, you can get it in 2 or 3 years. So the government is looking to sort of set up a way to make Japan attractive to investment bankers, and I think that they're dreaming and it's impossible. But and even if they go through all of those things, there are still all of the other problems. For example, if you wanted to apply for an investment banker's visa, you couldn't apply in English. They've just set up a department in the Ministry of Finance to be able to process visas in English, which they haven't been able to do until now. So there's just Japan, here we go, set up a dedicated office that will accept English language applications from foreign companies setting up operations. They've just done this. So, they're claiming that they want to replace Hong Kong as a Western financial services hub, and yet they don't even have a department which can accept forms in English right now. So yes, I'm laughing and I'm making fun of them, just like I did when I made fun of them for aspiring to become a tourism superpower. And maybe they'll do it. Maybe they will actually somehow figure it out, but I don't see it happening. And given that right now, if I was an investment banker or anyone, frankly, in Hong Kong, I would be looking to get out really fast. I mean, things are getting pretty dark there pretty fast, actually. Honestly, I would not want to be assigned there right now. I think the rate of descent there, the way that they're starting to put so many people into jail, like it's full on now, mainland like China type control there. So can Japan move quickly enough to go and claim all the people that want to leave Hong Kong, like within the next 12 months? No, they cannot. They could do it maybe in a 5 to 10 year plan, but I think it'll be too late by then. So we'll see, but there again, point is, a lot of foreign residents may benefit from the sort of changes that are being proposed by this, and it might contribute towards making Japan a bit more multi-ethnic and international. Hopefully they won't just make it for rich hedge fund managers. Hopefully they'll be able to benefit international professionals beyond that scope a little bit, but if they can do it, good. But we'll see. It's good that they're thinking about it, a little bit late, but yeah, I've said the same sort of things before. Just checking I haven't missed any comments. Don't seem to. I see Mr. Cordy Chap has lots of angry marks. Those do stand out, but down with the bankers. Well, some of them are nice people. I played rugby with a lot of them, and some of them are good guys and whatnot. And but yeah, there are some. I think there's a the first wave before the Credit Suisse collapse, which is pre-Lehman actually, but particularly from the Lehman shock. That's when all the expense accounts and everything sort of ended. But the lifestyle that those guys used to enjoy, it was just completely corrupt. Completely, drugs, prostitutes, outrageous apartments, all on company expenses, and and that just can't help but turn you into an arsehole. That would just turn any good person into an arsehole, and that's what happens, I think. And a lot of that ended just because the banks just couldn't afford to do it anymore. So my understanding, I'm sure at some level it's been some places it's probably like that, but it certainly has become less the absolute norm as it was for a time, like in the early 2000s. But yeah. So how is coronavirus going? It's going badly, and what's happening right now is that although the numbers are much less here, the medical system is now getting tested more than it's been tested before in terms of the number of serious cases, and the number of hospital ICU beds are now full. And it turns out that where the government and Osaka and places like that have tried to prepare for greater numbers by securing dedicated hospitals for intensive care and getting more beds made available, it turns out that, like, for example, for a special ICU hospital that's been built in Osaka with 50 beds, they need at least 130 nurses and staff to be able to maintain that, because the patients have to be watched 24 hours. And yet, in spite of having paid for and set up a hospital with these beds, they have only been able to find 50 nurses, so they can't open it up yet because they haven't been able to find staff for it. The staff that are looking after these patients, they face discrimination from within the medical profession. They don't want people treat them like lepers, basically. As well as they also, have to take on extra duties. For example, all the cleaning, the janitorial, the throwing out the rubbish and so on that they normally contract out. The contractors are refusing to do it, so it's all falling on the nurses. The nurses are not getting extra pay because the hospitals don't have the funding. The government has tried to release funding for hospitals to be able to pay nurses extra and overtime and whatnot, but it's being held up by the prefectures from being distributed, so they're not getting paid. These nurses are basically they're suffering abuse, discrimination. They're not getting paid. They're doing extra work. They're not getting overtime, and they are quitting. And the government's trying to fix the medical crunch problem by increasing beds, and they don't have nurses to look after the people in the beds. So hospitals are saying that they've got spare beds, but they can't accept any more patients because their staff can't handle it. This is particularly now hitting a crunch point. I guess there's two places. In Hokkaido, the positive test rate is now like 15% or something like that. 5% is considered like the red line when it means it's spreading faster than it's being tracked. Osaka and Tokyo are at about 5%, but Osaka is basically now almost out of beds. And Hyogo and the prefectures around it are also now hitting that point, and the numbers are spiking up. So it's getting to a pretty dangerous place in terms of the capacity of the medical system to be able to cope. It was really stretched during the first wave. The second wave, although the numbers were high, the number of intensive care cases weren't that high, but now we're beyond what we had in the first wave. And a lot of people pointing out the government the Ministry of Health put out a tweet the other day saying, hey, everybody show nurses moral support, and everybody reacted, why don't you give them money? And this is the other problem I've talked about on the show before. It's not just about more budget, although clearly that's part of the problem, but this is the whole thing about elderly care and the whole thing about welfare related jobs and caregiving type jobs. It's not like you're going to have those coke, sniffing, coke snorting, prostitute using investment bankers. If you paid them the same money to go and become a nurse, looking after COVID patients, they're probably not going to do that, right? I mean, it's not just a matter of it takes a certain type of person. It takes a very good type of person to do that, and the country is not producing the sorts of people that you need to become carers for other people. And so, as well as a population shortage, where there are not enough young people coming through, those young people are not going into welfare jobs, and why would you? They're underpaid and they're discriminated, so a lot of chickens kind of coming home to roost. with what's happening right now. And yeah, this is where it's insane to me that the government is continuing the go-to travel and campaigns and whatnot. They've only partially shut it down for Osaka and Hokkaido because they're, but like that's such a band-aid on this that they, you know, Osaka basically this week declared a full-on emergency, and they've told people to please stop going out. They are trying to effectively do the closest thing to a lockdown that you can do in Japan, and hopefully, you know, it works. I mean, it worked at the end of the first wave, but it took weeks to really take effect, and right now it's already hit the peak. So it's pretty bad time right now in those places, and they're on the verge. I don't think we're going to go into, I hope we're not going to go into sort of numbers like we see in America and Europe. But in terms of the capacity of the medical system, here and everywhere, now more than ever, even though, yes, you can get subsidized travel to go and take a vacation somewhere in Japan, and there are more and more people out and about, there's more and more people getting used to being able to go into work and go out and about. We're sort of getting used to, and we're getting sort of desensitized to the numbers. It is a really bad time right now. And yeah, if you're in Japan or anywhere else, frankly, that has this, if you're not in Australia or New Zealand or countries that have this really under control, now is unfortunately a time through the new year, through Christmas, it's going to suck. But, you know, you're going to go back to staying at home. So, yeah. Hey, FYI Tokyo, good to have you here in the comments. If they hadn't made the nurse testing for foreign nurses beyond, they might have had staff. I know what you mean. You're talking about the right idea that they thought they could bring in a lot of nurses from Indonesia and the Philippines, but the language requirements made it pretty much impossible for any of them to get certified. It was only like a 3% passing rate, and this was for older care, you know, let alone. And I don't think any of those nurses would be looking after COVID patients in ICUs, but it does highlight, as exactly your point is correct, that again, it's like how are they going to attract investment bankers when they can't attract nurses from Philippines and Indonesia when their lives depend on it, when the elderly bureaucrats who are writing these regulations, and they're doing this because they know that there won't be nurses to change their diapers, and they're desperate to get these people in, and even those people can't get it right when it's directly in their own interest. How are they going to attract you know, other professions? So yes, indeed, it could be a lot better. I mean, look, these are very big challenges. The language challenge is a huge one, and you can't have people who don't speak a language necessarily in hospitals. So they've got to figure that one out. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, FYI Tokyo. King and Kodos, 100% correct that they might have the beds, but not the people. Your friend here quit as she was getting forced to work with COVID ward, and all her family was against it, and she is now a sugar daddy. Do you mean she has a sugar daddy, or she is a sugar daddy? She doesn't sound like she'd be in a situation to be a sugar daddy. I'm not sure whether she'd be like a sugar mummy. You said a she. Did I say she? Your friend. I'm sorry. You know what? I put the gender in there. Oh, no, but you said she. Okay, I'm slightly confused by the final 3 words of that phrase. Final 5 or 6 words of that phrase. But yes. Right now there's huge retention problems, and you know, and the government is trying to fix it by building beds. You know, so again, hopefully they'll figure this out. How should I indeed? Winged Star, have you traveled since COVID started? No, I haven't even. I've ridden a train once. I went to the office once about 4 weeks ago, and other than that, I have been in this room. I work here. I sleep right around here. So you know, it's I have only been out. I was kind of proud of it as well, but yeah, I've only been out jogging. I had not been out any distance that I couldn't run from my house since March, and this is in spite of having no lockdown. But, you know, I'm lucky I can do it, of course. You know, I'm very fortunate for that. My son has been going to school. My wife has been going to work. But, yeah, I've definitely not traveled. And I wish I could. But you know what? Even if I could, I wouldn't. I don't think it's a responsible thing to sort of do. I'm very much looking forward to going to Australia and to New Zealand to go see my parents when this clears up, which I hope will be probably second half of next year. But at the earliest, but no, have not. Would love to, but have not. General Bumble Bumfire. Good handle name. Good to see lots of new looking handle names tonight, by the way. Nurses are well paid. Sort yourself out, Hiko. The benefits in New Zealand will to the Japanese. Well, whatever they're being paid, I don't think they're being paid enough. I mean, that's to talk about work that you know, is actually important and not economically valued sufficiently. They don't have an image to me of being well paid, and I think they should be. But perhaps I've got that wrong. Sugar daddy word. Oh, she's become that, okay, well, that sounds tough, Kang and Kodos. And again, yes, the COVID patients need to more than the sugar daddies, I'm sure. But there again, I can understand someone coming to that conclusion if you're trying to actually survive and you can't, as someone who helps other people. I mean, what should society be valuing? So yeah, that's where we're at with that. I mentioned before the government sort of doubling down on hydrogen and stimulus to and this as well on electrifying cars. And yeah, rules to basically have cars be not only increasingly electrified, but also to force them to, when they say carbon trading, I know that sounds sort of like cheating somehow, but yeah, this is basically for Toyota to the extent that they're building cars that are still polluting and contributing to emissions. You can offset that by also paying for forests to be built that can collect and sink carbon elsewhere in the world. So even if while you're in the middle of transitioning your operations, you can actually invest in operations that can offset that. You can invest in renewable energy, you can do other things, and this is where carbon trading actually is really effective for helping to support the economic infrastructure to set up renewable energy to take over from carbon emission based infrastructure. So I think this is actually an enlightened move from the Japanese government, and it's I think you have to pull out all the stops to be able to do what's needed. And today, I think this is the final story. Well, there's Osaka is nearly finished, but and indeed the story again of there not being enough nurses. Oh, we're coming up on time. I'm going to move fast. Hayabusa2. It's kind of funny. Like when that American probe went and was able to take a sample of asteroid material and is coming back to Earth, the coverage in the US, and I get it. It's like the Olympics. Every country's coverage sort of makes themselves look like they were the ones who got there first. Of course, Hayabusa2 did get to an asteroid, not entirely successful with getting a sample. They got a sample, but when it got back to Earth, it sort of cracked open. They still found some asteroid material inside, but it was like microscopic. But they kind of succeeded at that. But the second take at Hayabusa2 that went to the Ryugu asteroid that actually got a decent payload, came back perfectly this time. It is funny watching the English language news, the BBC coverage of this. They had it was all basically Australians commenting on it, and everyone was sort of I mean, good on them if they feel like that they did this and this contributes to enthusiasm for space exploration, then fine. If let the Australians think that they did this, it is pretty cool that they allowed it to crash in Australia, and that they're helping out with everything. But this is a very cool thing that they that Japan has pulled off a second time now. The only country, America did it with the moon missions, I suppose, but the only sort of robotic returning of a sample from asteroids ever done by anyone. I guess the Chinese are probably going to go out and just grab a whole asteroid and mine it and bring it back when they get around to it. They'll probably do something to try to outstage Japan, but this is a really significant, really cool achievement that they've done this. Can't wait to see the science that comes out of it. And what I loved the most was that the NHK news story that coverage that explained like how the probe and everything in this was sort of they said it's really a testament to Japanese sort of artisanal skill, and they actually interviewed like a bolt maker that made special bolts for the probe that had to be engineered with like a 0.001 millimeter sort of accuracy to be able to work properly for the release mechanism on the capsule, pointing out that a human hair is 6 nanometers, and this had to be 1, so it basically had to be 1/6 the width of a human hair, and it had to be hand engineered by an artisan to be able to make these bolts. So basically these cannot be machine engineered. The precision required for this required an artisan, which is one of the things that only Japan could make. Even if America needed these, they'd need to ask Japan for them, maybe China nowadays as well. But yeah, it's just really cool to see all the positive coverage from it. Really exciting. I can't wait for the day, which I hope comes in my lifetime, that we actually start meaningfully mining and actually getting like tons of resources from asteroids. That means that we don't have to get them all from down here. Australia doesn't launch satellites to asteroids. Well, Australia, again, the Japanese news was talking about how Australia's just funded a space agency. They could be doing that in a couple of years. New Zealand, of course, doesn't have a government-funded agency, but they do have the Electron Rocket Lab, or the Rocket Lab, which actually already has successfully launched satellites, which I find really cool that that's a private company from New Zealand that does that. But I think Australia will get there. I mean, if Australia can explode nukes, they can. I'm sure they can launch rockets. So I think that's pretty cool. Osaka's in the crapper. We just talked about that. Oh, and in fact, that's right. The governor who recommended everybody take iodine a while ago as a cure for COVID, which didn't really work. Now, in the face of the nursing shortage, he actually asked today to get the self-defense forces to come in and take the place of nurses where there are shortages to take care of beds, to which people were saying that yeah, that's a bit hard on the military, and is that really what they're sort of trained for? Other people saying, why don't you take some more iodine, you idiot? Yeah, not very charitable sort of comments, but that's the state that they're at. That's where the state of nursing and caregivers in Japan is, that when you're really up against the wall, there aren't any. Build robots, geez. I mean, you know, but they're calling for the military. That's how bad it is. That's my weight from this year. I started the year at about 87 when I was in Australia at the start of the year. And I'm right down now to 74, which is like my ideal BMI. It's pretty cool. That's just from the jogging. And what I like the most is that you can see for the last month or so, it's pretty much leveled out. So, you know, I'm not losing weight anymore. You know, it's not out of control. But I've lost like 15 kilos this year. So that's kind of cool. I mean, the holiday weight, I'm normally like under 85. I was, you know, that was pretty extreme at the end of the year. That was eating too much food in Australia. And that's the end of the show. 5 minutes over. Wasn't so bad. Thanks everyone for joining. Got Tico Sam, good to have you in here as well. Bio McNeil, good to see you. Congrats on the house, by the way, and congrats on getting the book. Where is it? Boom. Bio McNeil is getting this book, which I love and which I cried reading. He's getting it translated into Japanese. Cannot wait for that. So congratulations. Good night, Bio. I'm sorry I missed you, but the book is awesome. I highly recommend that, and congratulations on all of that stuff. This is actually the Withings. I've got a Withings watch and a scale, and it's just the standard app that comes with that. I just weigh myself every morning, Wingstar, and I actually was using that from before when I even had the scale, but just doing that every day as a habit just helps me realize, oh, yesterday I ate too much. So yeah, it's kind of nice, you know, and I'm not underweight. I'm still overweight, but I'm pretty much on the money right now. So yeah, it feels good. I never thought I'd get down to normal weight. So yeah. Christopher Lou, good to see you. Yeah, congrats on not needing to run to do it either. So yeah, a lot of people seem to have done. People have gone in all directions. Of course, some people have added weight, but yeah, good to see everybody has done that. Remember, if you like the show, if you like it helps. I do appreciate it. Have a good week, everybody. Stay safe, especially like in Japan. It's getting kind of hairy again right now. So definitely. Please stay at home if you can do that, and you know, take care of yourself and everyone else around you. Remember, you can get in touch with me and follow me on Twitter. I'm probably going to continue to be a little bit quieter on Twitter for a while, but I'll be here every 10:30 p.m. every Sunday night, getting you up to speed with the week's news as I've just done. And love talking with all of you guys, and thanks for joining. I really do appreciate it every week. And remember, if you missed some of the start, you can watch it recorded. Nesta125. Another Among Us, yes, easy to kill. I will be there. I suck at that game, but I do enjoy it. So yeah, let me know. And yeah, have a good week, everybody. Milchman2, final comment. I'll take this one. Has there been talks about opening up borders for foreign professionals who get brand new work visa but aren't living in Japan yet? I think that's what they're talking about with, you know, trying to make some sort of sped up way for investment bankers. Yeah, you have to be an investment banker, but yeah, there's talk of that. I'm hoping maybe other foreign visa types will benefit from whatever they change it to. Anyway, hit the like button. Have a good week, everybody. Thank you for that, Shubhas. Keep cool till after school. Kaikita ano. Peace. Boom. See you later. Ending stream.